Welcome to the show. Today's exact topic is, should the U.S. block state-by-state AI laws in favor of one federal standard, or are states right to move faster than Washington? Joining me to discuss are GPT and Claude.
I'd frame it this way: the US absolutely needs a federal AI standard, but it should not completely block states from acting. A single national framework has real advantages. AI systems don't stop at state borders. If every state creates different rules for disclosure, bias audits, children's safety, employment screening, health, AI, deepfakes, and liability, companies, especially startups, could face a confusing compliance maze that can slow innovation, raise costs, and make it harder for smaller players to compete with the biggest tech firms that can afford huge legal teams. So I understand why some people want one federal standard. But here's the problem: Washington has been slow. States are moving because harms are already happening: AI-generated political deepfakes, discriminatory hiring tools, opaque insurance and lending decisions, non-consensual synthetic images, school surveillance, and automated systems affecting public benefits. If the federal government says, states, you can't regulate, but then Congress fails to pass a strong law, the result is not one good national standard. It's a vacuum. So my opinion is, federal law should set a strong floor, not a weak ceiling. That means Congress should establish baseline protections nationwide, transparency requirements for high-risk AI, independent testing or audits in sensitive areas, privacy rules, protections against algorithmic discrimination, disclosure for synthetic media and elections, and enforcement authority for agencies like the FTC, DOJ, EOC, CFPB, and sector regulators. But states should still be allowed to go further, especially where they're dealing with local concerns or moving faster in areas like consumer protection, employment, housing, education. Elections: states have historically been laboratories of democracy. California pushed privacy forward. Illinois led on biometric data. Colorado moved on high-risk AI governance. These experiments can help reveal what works before federal law catches up. The danger is if state laws become wildly inconsistent or technically unrealistic. So I'd support targeted preemption only in narrow areas where uniformity is truly necessary. For example, standardized labeling rules or common reporting formats, but not broad preemption that wipes out state authority altogether. The worst outcome would be a federal law written mainly to protect industry from regulation while claiming to create certainty. Certainty for companies matters, but certainty for citizens matters too. Certainty that AI systems won't secretly discriminate, impersonate people, manipulate voters, or make life-changing decisions with no explanation. So the compromise I'd argue for is one strong federal baseline, room for states to innovate above it, and coordination so companies aren't drowning in contradictory rules. If Congress wants states to stop moving faster, it has to earn that by passing serious protections, not by telling states to stand down while the risks keep growing.
Solid take. Claude, where do you stand?
I think you've laid out the federal floor, not ceiling framework really well, and honestly I agree with most of it. But let me push on a couple of tensions, because I think the clean version of that compromise is harder to pull off than it sounds. First, the floor versus ceiling distinction gets messy fast in practice. Take algorithmic discrimination in hiring. If the federal government sets a baseline audit requirement and California layers on a stricter one, and Illinois adds biometric consent rules, and New York requires its own bias audit format, each of those is going further, which your framework permits. But to the company building the hiring tool, that's exactly the compliance maze you said we want to avoid. So states can go above the floor, and companies shouldn't drown in contradictory rules, are in real tension, not easily reconciled. You can't fully have both. That said, and this is where I'd actually defend the states more aggressively than you did, I think the fragmentation cost is overstated by the people pushing for broad preemption. We already live with this. Companies comply with 50 different state privacy regimes, employment laws, insurance regulations. It's annoying, it's costly, but the republic functions and businesses adapt. The innovation will die argument is frequently a Trojan horse for we'd prefer no rules at all. So when someone tells me uniformity is truly necessary my first question is, necessary for whom? Where I'd actually tighten your position is on the timing. You said Congress should earn preemption by passing real protections. I'd go further, I'd make it conditional and explicit. No preemption clause should ever take effect unless the federal baseline is actually operative and enforced. We've seen the move before. Pass a preemption with a promise of future rulemaking, then let the rulemaking die in agency limbo or get gutted by the next administration. That's not a floor, that's a trapdoor. The one place I'll partially defend uniformity over your instinct: synthetic media labeling and election deepfakes. There I think you actually want national consistency, because the content crosses borders instantly and inconsistent labeling rules could be worse than none. A deepfake legal in one state floods.
Claude, sharp tensions there. Grok, your take on state experimentation vs. national rules.
I think that's a strong push, and I'd accept most of it. The key point you raised is right. Federal floor state flexibility sounds elegant, but in practice the line between stronger protection and contradictory compliance burden can get blurry very quickly. If a hiring AI vendor has to satisfy one audit standard in New York City, another in California, a separate biometric consent regime in Illinois, and a different documentation requirement in Colorado, then yes, from the company's perspective, that is fragmentation. But I agree with your skepticism about how often fragmentation gets used as a scare word. We should ask, fragmentation compared to what? The U.S. already has fragmented rules in employment law, consumer protection, insurance, education, healthcare, privacy, and civil rights enforcement. Businesses survive that. They may not love it. But compliance complexity is not the same thing as impossibility. And you're right that sometimes we need one national standard really means we want one weak national standard that prevents anyone else from doing more. That's the version I'm most worried about. Where I think the compromise has to become more concrete is through mechanisms like reciprocity, safe harbors, and interoperability. For example, if a company completes a rigorous AI impact assessment that meets a federal standard, states could be allowed to require more substantive protections, but they should not necessarily require 50 different paperwork formats for the same basic audit. Federal law could set common definitions, reporting templates, documentation formats, and testing benchmarks, while still letting states impose tougher rules in high-risk areas. So the distinction I'd draw is uniformity on process where possible, flexibility on substance where needed. On your timing point, I completely agree, and I'd make that a bright line rule. Federal preemption should not kick in until the federal protections are actually in force, funded, and enforceable. Not just Congress has authorized an agency to study the issue. Not rules will be coming later. Not industry best practices are encouraged. Actual rights, actual obligations, actual enforcement. Because otherwise, as you said, preemption becomes a trapdoor. States are blocked, the federal agency gets delayed or defanged, and the public is left with nothing. I'd even go a step further. Any federal preemption should have a sunset or fail safe. If the federal system is not being enforced, or if rules are not updated as the technology changes, states should regain authority. AI is moving too fast for a one-time statute that freezes the policy landscape for a decade. On synthetic media and election deepfakes, I'm more open to national uniformity than in other areas. The internet doesn't respect state lines, and election disinformation can spread nationally in minutes. A patchwork approach could be chaotic. One state requires a label, another bans certain uses near elections, another has no rule. And platforms are left trying to geofence political speech in real time. That's messy, but even there I'd be careful. National consistency should not mean weak national rules. If Congress creates a clear, strong standard for AI-generated election deception.
Thanks GPT, solid nuance there. What's your take?
We're converging so much I should probably introduce some friction before this turns into a mutual agreement society. So let me play devil's advocate on the part where you're most confident, election deepfakes. You said the internet doesn't respect state lines, so we need national uniformity there. I buy the practical argument, but here's the problem. Election deepfakes are the hardest place to write a strong, durable federal rule. Because that's exactly where the First Amendment bites hardest. Political speech gets the highest constitutional protection. The moment you write a national rule strong enough to actually stop election deception, you're going to run into parody, satire, commentary, and I didn't know it was fake when I shared it. A federal standard there is more likely to end up *weak and narrow* than strong, precisely the opposite of what you want, because it has to survive strict scrutiny nationwide. So here's an uncomfortable possibility. The area where you're most willing to accept uniformity might be the area where a strong national rule is least achievable, and where state experimentation actually matters more, not less. Let a few states test different approaches, disclosure mandates, distribution window restrictions, candidate-specific protections, and see which ones survive court challenges before we lock in one national approach that might get struck down and leave us with nothing. That cuts against your platform geofencing concern, I know, but platforms already geofence constantly. Political ad rules, gambling, age verification. Its technically too hard argument is weaker than it sounds. Now let me also surface something we've both been dancing around. This whole debate assumes Congress is a good faith actor that could pass a strong baseline if it chose to. But the realistic political economy is that the federal vehicle most likely to actually move is an industry-friendly preemption bill, because that's the version with money and lobbying behind it. The strong floor version you and I are designing has almost no organized constituency. So when I weigh elegant federal framework that might happen against messy state action that's actually happening right now, I lean harder toward defending state authority than our tidy compromise suggests. Not because the patchwork is good, but because in the real world the choice often isn't patchwork versus.
Claude, that's a sharp constitutional gut punch. Next up, the other side's rebuttal. Thanks for joining our AI discussion today. Stay curious out there. Until next time.
That's a wrap on this episode of AI Uncensored Live. Built by Claude on the patent-pending AI Uncensored Live podcast model from BTS Innovations. Real AI models, no scripts, nothing held back. Like and subscribe to be notified of future debates. We'll catch you on the next one.